Morning everybody. I'd like to welcome everyone to this multi-location hybrid meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee, which is open to the press and public on request. This meeting will not be broadcast live, however, a recording will be made available as soon as possible after the meeting is concluded. We welcome the use of the Welsh language at meetings. I've had no request for people to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. Please can members attending via Microsoft Teams refrain from using the chat function and instead use the raised hand icon to indicate when you want to speak. May I remind members that as per statutory guidance made under Section 4 of the Local Government Wales Measure 2011, that our formally adopted hybrid meeting policy and any member attending a meeting remotely must be able to be seen and heard by the members and the officers who are attending at the meeting, as well as by members of the public viewing the meeting. So can I ask that you all please use your cameras for the duration of this meeting. Please remember to keep your microphone muted when you are not talking. Moving on to the agenda. Agenda item 1, welcome and apologies. Jay, do we have any apologies, please?
Thanks, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Williams this morning.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Jade, can you ask members in alphabetical order to state whether they have any interest to declare?
Thanks, Chair. So starting with Councillor Ashley, please.
Okay. As far as I'm aware, not, but obviously I'll declare if I find anything.
Perfect, thank you. Councillor Jones, please.
My wife is in receipt of a council pension and I'm a contributor to pension scheme.
Perfect, thank you.
Jade, I better go back. I always forget about that pension. Sorry, I'm in receipt of a council pension.
Perfect, thank you, Councillor Ashley. Councillor Keat, please. Perfect. And yourself, Chair?
My husband's in receipt of a pension.
Perfect, thank you very much. And Mr. Rees, please.
Yes, I have a very small Torfaen council pension from many years ago. And just to remind everybody, I'm not Carol Davis. That's my wife's name. I've borrowed her laptop this morning. So diolch. Ta.
Thank you, Mr. Rees.
Thank you. Thank you all. Moving on to agenda item 3, the minutes of the Governance and Audit Committee meeting from the 25th of September 25. Members, please can you state whether you have anything to raise in relation to the minutes? If not, I'll take them as agreed. I see no hands raised, so I'll take them as agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 4 is the action sheet. Would you like to make an update on the Marmot action, which has been sent to us, please?
Thank you, Chair. Just to let you know, really, that it's not been forgotten that we'll look to invite lay members to a workshop briefing consultation event in the new year to support lay members' development and their understanding, and to give you opportunities to be involved. I have spoken to Neil Jones, who's the head of communications, and he's looking to invite lay members to one of the citizen assembly meetings, and there may even be an opportunity for you as the chair to be involved in some kind of capacity as well. So we'll keep you involved in the new year.
Okay, thank you. Is there any comments or questions about that?
Yeah, but that's actually brand I've been using on the Marmot.
Sorry, who was that? Councillor Armstrong, was it you?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't realise I was switched on, Chair. I will say properly now, it would be useful to have something on Marmot. I don't think I've been on to train. I know the principles, but it's always useful to have a seminar or a training session on them, because there's a heck of a lot involved in them. I'll take Tom's thing on that. You can never have too much of this, to be quite honest, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ashley.
Yeah, I mean, the seminars, workshops, etc., they're all ongoing. I think the action that was picked up in the last committee was specifically for the lay members, to get them more involved, so that was my response.
All I'd like to say to come back on that, I see the chief executives there, but the complexity of what we've got, and I know the Chief Exec said that, is it's never, I get my head around some of this at times, and I'm on a lot of scrutiny committees. I still welcome the chance to have a conversation, and thank you very much for stuff you put on this.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jade wants to make a comment.
I just noticed that Mr. Callaghan has joined the meeting. Can I just check your declarations of interest, please?
Yes, thanks, Jade. I have a small pension from Torvine.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Rees, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, and thank you. I realise this hasn't been forgotten. I know that we will get briefing, training, workshop, whatever you want to call it, and I look forward to that because you know, these Marmot principles are sort of embedded in a lot of what we are going to be discussing about later on the agenda. What I would also like to have a little bit of guidance about is these Apollo principles that are mentioned in a number of the reports about how you approach things in the council. I'd like to have a bit more information on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've got somebody coming back with that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. The Apollo principles are just referring to the council's medium-term financial planning processes. It's effectively what we've called that project, and it gives us a real focus around certain principles in order to ensure that we are able to govern ourselves and to deliver against our long-term, medium-term financial planning. That's all it's referring to.
Thank you, thank you, Stephen. I was just a bit confused whether it was some standalone exercise or something, but it's just a title. Thank you. Diolch.
Okay, thank you. So moving on for that, if we've got nothing else to raise with regard to the action sheet, can we note its comments? Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 5, statements of accounts. Rob, Head of Financial Services, please could you present your report for us? The report starts on page 19.
Thank you, Chair, and morning all. Yeah, this is just a very short report, just to give you an update on where we are with our finalisation of our 24-25 statement of accounts. You'll be aware that normally by this point of the year we would have already considered the final version of the accounts, and ideally they would have been certified, approved by Council and certified by the Auditor General for Wales. You'll be aware by virtue of this being on the agenda that that's not been the case for this year, so this report just gives an update on where we are in that process and the challenges that we've encountered, resource and otherwise. So in a nutshell, where we should have been is that by the 30th of June we should have published our draft accounts. We met that requirement with no issue at all. We actually published by the end of May. But we should have had them certified, well, it's certainly audited and then certified by the end of October, which was a month earlier than the requirement the year before. We obviously haven't achieved that. We were seemingly close to achieving that, notwithstanding sort of some internal resource issues we've had within the relevant team. A number of issues had been identified during the audit. That's fairly standard, fairly typical. And they were things that we either agreed we would amend and reflect in the final version of the 24-25 accounts, or we would remedy in readiness for 25-26. But unfortunately, as we neared the conclusion of that process, a more major issue was identified by our colleagues at Audit Wales. And I outline in the report a little bit of background as to what that issue is. But in a nutshell, it's to do with our approach to asset accounting. So it's not the asset valuations per se that's the issue. It's more, it's almost more our sequencing and how we put certain transactions through the accounts. So in isolation, those transactions aren't necessarily a problem, but when you do them in the wrong order, they can lead to a material misstatement, and that would appear to be the case on this occasion. It's a multi-year issue. It's a practice, or the practice that we've adopted has been in place for a number of years. It's not previously been identified as an issue, but it has this year. We don't dispute that it isn't an issue, having had another look at it and taken the comments and advice from Audit Wales. But what it does mean is that it's a fairly significant issue to correct, because, as I said, it's multi-year, and we basically need to go back to a year where we feel that the accounts are materially correct, which is looking like it'll probably be around 2021. So we're talking about sort of 4 or 5 years worth of corrections, and there's a knock-on effect. So that's going to take time to work through. The frustration, I suppose, it's a positive on the one hand, but a frustration on the other is the fact that the issues identified don't actually have any impact on the council's reserves, the council's general fund, the level of council tax paid. They're all accounting entries. They all get neutralised. But notwithstanding that, it does mean that certain parts of the balance sheet are misstated. So we're working through it, and we're working through it with Audit Wales. As I said, we don't dispute that there's a correction that needs to be made. The issue we've got is just exactly how long it will take, first of all, for us to do the corrections we believe are needed, and then obviously for Audit Wales to review that and confirm that they are content with them. Our aim is to try and get this resolved before the end of this financial year so that it doesn't have a knock-on impact going into 25-26. And as I said towards the end of the report, is we would hope to bring the final accounts to the next committee meeting, which is on the 19th of March. Or before that, ideally, if a special meeting could be arranged. But I think the 19th is a realistic target. I said it's not guaranteed that we'll reach that goal simply because of the competing priorities within the team. I said we've got ongoing resource issues as well. But I say we are sort of prioritising it as best we can and endeavouring to get this resolved ASAP. So it's just really, like I said, the recommendation state. This is just for the committee to note the position. Obviously, I'm happy to take any questions. Mike Jones from Audit Wales is also on the call, just in case there's any questions or comments from Audit Wales. But yeah, other than that, it's just to give you an update, just more in case you were wondering where the accounts had got to, because like I said, they should have been brought to this committee before now. Okay. So.
Thank you for that, Rob. Have we got any questions? Councillor Jones, your hand is raised.
Can I just check? Does this mean that we're still on target to meet any statutory requirements in terms of things like publication of the accounts?
Yeah, well, it means we won't meet the statutory. Well, we already haven't met the statutory requirement. So the statutory requirement was for the accounts, the final accounts, to be certified by the 31st of October. We've obviously missed that deadline. There's no, not to my knowledge anyway, there's no sort of consequence of that, you know, financially or otherwise. It's more, I suppose, a reputational matter as much as anything. Not that, you know, this is any excuse of any sort, but, you know, we're not the only local authority in this boat. Actually, we're probably one of about 50% of them at the moment. You know, it is proving harder and harder for authorities to meet that deadline. But like I said, that isn't an excuse, but it does give context that this isn't, unfortunately, it's not uncharted territory for us as a local authority to be going into.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Ashley.
I appreciate the complexity of is it data entry or was it error?
I suppose ultimately it's error. It's error in terms of the approach though. So it's not that sort of we've keyed in the wrong figures or anything like that. It's simply there's a sort of preferred or recommended order of doing certain transactions in terms of asset accounting. And we've been doing them in a certain order, like I said, for a number of years. But actually what's transpired is the order that we're doing it in is different, and therefore that leads to the material error in the figures ultimately because, for example... background noise.
Sorry, Councillor Ashley. Sorry, Councillor Ashley.
Are you okay?
We got background noise from somebody. I'm not sure who.
Yeah.
Right, Councillor Ashley, did you hear the comment, the response?
Yes, I certainly did. The other question is how I presume that's going to take officer time to go back through the system again.
Yeah, exactly, and that's probably one of, if not the biggest challenge we've got, is actually not understanding. You know, we know what we need to do. It's actually how we can implement that in the system, because you know it is a big exercise to undo what's been done for at least sort of 4 or 5 years. So yeah, the system aspect is probably the biggest thing we're contending with at the moment. But we do feel we found a way forward with that. It's just, again, it's time consuming, and it will require Audit Wales to give their view and you know, agree that they're comfortable with the approach we've taken.
Thank you for that. I'm just getting an understanding of what you had to go through. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr Rees, your hand is raised.
Diolch, Chair, and diolch, Rob, for that explanation and honest explanation of what has gone on. You know, I'm content that, you know, it doesn't have the impact on our day-to-day finances and that. What my question is that might yourself or anyone within the team, were you aware of this before Audit Wales brought it to your attention? You know, now that it has been brought to your attention, obviously you're dealing with it and as quickly as you can. But I wondered if there might have been a moment where this could have been addressed without Audit Wales bringing it up. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question. No, it's a completely fair question, and obviously it's something that we've reflected on internally. No is the short answer. You know, we didn't necessarily know that this was not the correct approach. I say it's been an approach that's been in place for a number of years. And yeah, I think it was just a particular line of audit questioning sort of brought it to light, and one that perhaps hadn't been asked before. But yeah, we certainly didn't know within the team that it wasn't the correct approach, and yeah, certainly didn't knowingly go into the audit process almost trying to hope that we could get away with it. No, you know, we thought that was appropriate. But upon explanation, can recognise where we've gone wrong.
Okay, thank you, Rob, and thank you, Audit Wales, for highlighting it to us. Diolch.
Thank you very much for that explanation. That was great. I can see no more hands raised. If there are no more questions or queries, can we move on to the recommendations that are on page 20? If everybody's happy, we'll accept these reports. Yeah, everybody's happy. Okay, we'll take them as agreed. Thank you very much. Agenda item 6, the panel performance assessment feedback. Mr Vickers, I think you're going to present this report for us, please.
I am. Thank you, Chair. Yes, and thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. Before you today is the Council's draft response to the panel performance assessments, which I'll refer to as the PPA from now on, which took place earlier this year. As a statutory requirement under the Local Government and Elections Act 2021, every council in Wales must undergo a PPA once during each electoral cycle. Consideration of the draft response by the Governance and Audit Committee is part of that statutory process. The panel focused its recommendations around 3 key areas: our federation, with Blaenau Gwent, of course, our Marmot and our communities, work and early intervention and prevention. They also provided additional recommendations around communications and engagement and workforce development. The review concluded that the Council is well led, with strong member-officer relationships and clear role understanding, enabling effective policy setting and rapid implementation. We also were assessed as having robust governance systems and positive organisational culture, and we have set out a bold and innovative vision to tackle health inequality and sustainability challenges, creating an opportunity to advance the federated model. The review also concluded that delivering our vision would require rapid translation of Marmot principles and early intervention and prevention into actionable detail, with risk management focused on execution rather than inaction. There is a potential to use the Apollo modelling, so again that's our approach to our MTFP, medium-term financial planning process, to drive transformation and address complex issues. And whilst leadership is strong and well supported, the Council must avoid over-reliance on key individuals within the Council by developing a broader leadership programme. The Council accepts the recommendations and thanks the peer assessors for their work. They did a great job, and we accept the draft. And the draft action plan, therefore, is set out in Appendix 1 before you today. The action plan also gave us an overview of the work carried out in each area since the PPA fieldwork was undertaken. We thank the committee for considering the draft plan today. We look forward to your views on whether it adequately addresses the recommendations, and I invite members today to consider the report and the accompanying action plan to provide any feedback or recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Have we got any comments or questions with regards to this plan? Councillor Keats.
Great, thank you. Right. I noticed in the report, it says there about our Federation with Blind and Gwent, about deeper and faster. My question would be, what does deeper and faster look like? And what do you feel are the three key risks in terms of going deeper and faster with Blind and Gwent? So how do you see the risks at the moment with this integration with Blind and Gwent? The threats, so we say. What keeps you awake at night, Stephen?
What keeps me awake at night? Yeah. I suppose if we start with the key risk, because this may cover much of your first question, I think the obvious thing is with pace comes disruption to culture, and culture has to adapt throughout. And so that can, of course, mean that members and our staff and our communities perhaps can't keep up with the changes that are going on within the organisation. I think that's something that we do listen to very, very carefully. So we have, I'll give an example as to how we've managed that. We've had feedback from our own staff that have told us that that they get what we're trying to do, and they really do understand the challenges that we're trying to tackle and the benefits that the Federation can bring as a result of that. But some of those challenges were happening too quickly for them, so we've throttled back some of the activity to ensure that staff could keep pace. It's not uncommon for us to be at the top of the mountain when people are still on base camp 1, and we need to be really mindful of that. I think that's fair to say. So that's certainly something that is a risk to us. I think we are treading on second risk. I think then is we are traversing unknown territory. So there's always a risk that we make mistakes. Audit Wales, I know, are really interested in working with us on this. They recognise actually that we're doing something that's quite groundbreaking, and from that perspective, they are really interested and very supportive actually of helping us on that journey. But that's something that probably would worry me, that we, to ensure that we don't make any grave errors in that way. I think in terms of a third risk to us, I think the risk is to not do it in some ways more than it is to do it, if I'm being honest. I think the major benefit, of course, is that we will, as two councils, be more resilient, working more closely together. I think it has to be clearly understood that we are a federated model of operation. We are still two sovereign councils. I think that's a risk that people misunderstand that. But that federated model really gives us a chance to increase resilience, and we've already seen the benefits of that from within the executive the senior level of the organisation, what we're seeing is a reduction in the amount of people and posts and spend, therefore, that would sit, for example, at the executive board level, and we're starting to see that either helps us to manage our budget through savings, or, just as importantly, it helps us to bring greater resilience throughout the organisation, because we're able to invest further down within the organisation and, of course, preserve those front lines. So they're the things, I think, that keep us up at night. And the benefits, and what does further and faster look like, I suppose? Well, I think it looks like what's before you within this plan to some degree. We've done a lot of work since we agreed to work in a formal federated model on a longer-term basis since January. We've gone through some major restructuring in Blaenau Gwent, which we had to do in order to... It was impossible, I felt, for me to be a part-time chief executive in two places. So I was really keen to ensure that what we had to do was align our structures so that operationally it became easier for us to manage. That also, of course, afforded us the immediate benefit of having to seeing posts, not just the chief exec post, but seeing several other posts operating across the two councils in those leadership roles. So that was part of that. So that's really been to our advantage. In the broader sense, and certainly linking this into Marmot, there is Councillor Ashley mentioned it there, it's a complex landscape that we work in any case. We're introducing a federation, whilst we remain sovereign. We've got Marmot and we've got our deal that we're working on too, and the missions that ultimately are the mechanism by which we're delivering our deal. It's quite a complex landscape, I do accept that, and I think that's something that it needs to be continuously explored and explained, and we're still unpicking some of that ourselves. The easiest way to think about Marmot, of course, is Marmot is just the lens by which we look at the challenges across our communities, those inequalities across our communities. It just tells us where to focus our efforts proportionately to help our communities as best as we are able. And then the deal is the work that we're doing within those communities. That's probably the simplest way to explain it. But I think that understanding is difficult. But we have, of course, moved really quickly into the federation, the benefits of the federation, and the work that we've got now around delivering outcomes through the Marmot lens within communities through the deal. So I think that's what at pace looks like. I think we've moved really quite quickly.
Just to follow up, that you mentioned obviously the Marmite principles. Take my own ward of Chibeth and Penighan, probably the most deprived area of Torvai. What does the Marmite principles look like to my own ward? Yeah. What will my residents recognise by the end of 2026? A difference to their lives by the introduction of Marmite?
Yeah, well, I think what it will first do is it tells us the story about what's going on in those deprived communities, as you pointed out, those areas where there are inequalities. What Marmot also gives us the opportunity to do is to consider the resources that are available to us and to apply them but universally in one sense. So we're trying to ensure that everybody within the borough gets support. But in some areas, it makes sense for us to put a higher level of resources into certain places. And you use your ward, councillor, as the example. So I would expect us to be seeing proportionately more resource that we've got available to us, focused around those communities with the highest level of need. Because the important thing about Marmot is that you don't leave communities behind. This is an all boats rising on a tide principle. The danger is that if you just focus on highly vulnerable people, for example, you may make a difference to a small number of people in the borough, but it's more difficult to see the universal benefit to the borough, and there's a risk that some gain, others lose. The idea behind Marmot is that everybody moves forward. It's just that in order to move forward, some people need more support than others, and communities like the ones that you've described would fit that criteria. So that's the benefit to it. So what I would expect to see, therefore, is a greater understanding of the challenges that exist within certain wards, and a proportionate focus of effort of our resources around those wards, particularly from our operational services, for example, but that would apply equally to areas across the ward where our neighbourhood services are operating too.
Yeah. Look, the reason why I'm saying this, right, is that, again, I go back, I mean, I can see this, so is to level things up. And again, I apologise for being a bit parochial to my own ward. Is, you know, where we've got Trevethan at the moment, apart from a bit of a rat infestation going on at the moment, but that's by the by, which is quite serious, I think. We have our local schools there in when only 1 in 4 every children there, right, has got additional learning needs, compared to Crossy-Keighley when it's 1 in 16. And I appreciate the fact that it's all about levelling up, but some communities have got a lot of levelling up to do, compared to areas, you know, shall we say, in the south of our ward. So, and that's I'll go back to the question again. Come the end of 2026, will the residents of my ward see an impact of Marmite?
I think the answer is they will. I think what we will be able to do, I mean, look, we're talking here in some circumstances around generational change. These types of changes don't happen overnight. So will those health inequalities be changed by 2026 to as large a degree as we would like? The answer is no. Marmot gives us the opportunity to operate in terms of a much longer a master planning piece of work, effectively looking 10, 15, 20 years generationally into the future. But what you can be assured of is that we will, with the limited resources that councils have got, now we are extending those resources in 2 ways really, because we are working hard in the early intervention and prevention space in order that what we can do is see lower investment than in the sharper end of our business, because people hopefully won't need support of social services, for example. That gives us a chance to reduce demand-led services at the back end of our system and invest it in early intervention and prevention services. And what that will mean is that where those areas, you're applying the principle of proportionate universalism, in order for some areas to move forward, it means that they will get a larger piece of the pie than other areas, because, as you've pointed out, some places need it more than others. But what it doesn't mean is that we'll neglect one place over another. We can't give everything to just the deprived areas and neglect those that are considered less deprived, because what we will create there is an improvement in one place, but it will be at a detriment to another. So, and that's what Marmot tries to do, is it tries to give us that chance to apply improvement universally, but it says some places need more support than others, and the places that you're describing will get that support under this model under this current approach.
Good. Well, as far as an improvement goes, I would just like to see it just level off. Yeah. And, you know,
I think what you'll have by the end of 2026, and it's a really good question, and we will be able to demonstrate this by 2026, is just exactly how that is being applied, including within those areas that are more deprived, for example. So you will see a proportionate difference in the way that we're approaching things across our communities. And that's the benefit of it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that explanation. Thank you for the question. Councillor Ashley, your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you. I think this is a very interesting set of proposals you've got here, Chief Exec. I thank you for the training that you put myself and some members on with Steve Thomas, because it goes along with the proposition that you put here. I've noted that this is probably the only game in Wales for transition, and you've been very ambitious to put the Blaen y Gwent Corfine thing on, as Steve suggested to us. this makes our council and the partnership with Blaenau Gwent into a much bigger proposition than if we were to all carry on differently. So the conversation you have with Councillor Kite was an interesting one, but the bit I find really interesting is how you get leadership into the council. And I've noted a few things here about bottom-up, top-down approach, and you look at talking about non-hierarchical leadership in the council. I mean, our biggest asset is our officers and how we grow them. And I put the word grow our own because at the end of the day, the biggest problem we seem to have all the time I've been a councillor is losing really good officers, some to retirement and some to other places. In a way, that's a mark of success if we lose them, but we have to replace them. And succession planning and putting good people in place, I think, has been a mark of your leadership. But put in place, and now we're working in partnership with Blaenau Gwent, and some of the things we're good at, they're not so good at, and some of I've been told this, and I can see it happening. So I think this idea of leadership, which is a funny word, and some people like it, some don't like it, but it's important that we develop this, and that we also develop our people down the line to come up into positions, which I think you've been doing quite well, personally. And we need not to be reliant on key individuals, and when they go, we get a hiatus in the organisation. I think it's important that, because I think up until recently that was a problem. So some of this is reflecting on this, and I think the way you put various strategies in, if you didn't refer to me back on this, it's not easy. You used the word focus, and I put the word map down. Be able to map our way around this territory and get some idea of where we're going. I'd like to hear your reflections back on what I've just suggested here, Chief Executive.
I think what you said, right? What is the succession plan looking like?
Yeah. Thank you for the comments, Councillor Ashley. You rightly say it's a complex landscape, and I think we are breaking new ground here. I think that's absolutely right. There was the point that you've raised, particularly around succession planning, is one that was picked up by and not relying on too fewer officers to be able to drive this. I think, in fact, Councillor Keats, you once, I think it was in this meeting actually, but you once made reference to the fact that if you think it's expensive to, if you think training, exactly. So if you think training is expensive, try ignorance. Exactly. It's absolutely true. I take that really seriously. So we're investing in our staff at all levels. What we've really been able to see is we've got some wonderful staff across our boroughs, and we are an attractive place to work. So, for example, I do know this. I'll give an example of where across the country people will talk about pressures in social care recruitment. In children's social care in Torvine, we've got one agency worker, and by February we'll have none. That's a fact. Other councils will be struggling in places like this. We're an attractive place to work. Part of that is because people can see opportunities here. We've got a good culture, we've got good operating models, and this is a place where people can come and they can lead at all levels. And I give a great example of that, just in something that hit my inbox this morning. So we have brought together both councils in what we're calling our future Blaenau Gwent and Torvine groups. These are the 250 odd leaders that sit across our boroughs. And I've got a Chief Executive's programme of development and investment in them. And that group, I wrote to that group yesterday, and I'd asked them, one of the questions that we'd asked them at the more recent future Blaenau Gwent and Torvine event was we wanted to test their understanding as to the programme of work that we're on, and we were really keen to ensure that they felt comfortable leading on that work. So that meant leading with their teams, but it also means leading within communities, because of course the deal requires that. So yesterday, the great news is that when I did the survey at the end of the session, when I've had the feedback forms back, 90% of that group have said that they are, and the majority of these are extremely confident, but are very confident. So 90% of that group said they are either very confident or confident to lead and want to lead their own teams or lead within communities. Yesterday night, about 4:45, I sent an email out to that group asking for volunteers, because I think the best way to allow people to lead is allow them to be putting themselves forward, go where that energy is, rather than to try to force people into it. Yesterday, I emailed them and asked them, we're ready for the next level of engagement around the deal, and we want our staff to be leading that within our communities, within those sessions. And within 10 minutes, I'd had about 20 or 30 of them, or 20 plus of them, coming back to me saying, yeah, we're really keen to get involved. So I think you start to really see this, and that kind of culture and that kind of support and those opportunities for people to develop, progress and lead at all levels within the organisation really means that we've got a good future ahead of us. And of course, back to your point about the risk of not investing, Councillor, it's something that I've taken really seriously, and we're investing at all levels. So I've got a whole programme of work now and a whole infrastructure that I'm building around that to make sure that we are properly investing in our staff so that they can be great. We can also then, of course, and this is important because we don't give without expecting something back, that's fair to say, we can then clearly say to them, look, this is what we're doing for you, but this is what we want back from you. And our staff have responded brilliantly to that approach.
Excellent, that's good to hear. It's reassuring. Very good. Mr. Rees, your hand is raised.
Diolch yn fawr, Chair, and diolch yn fawr, Stephen, for your comprehensive remarks on this. First off, I'd like to thank everybody that was involved in the whole of this process. And the comments I want to make, I hope you will take as being supportive of the whole exercise. I think what I'm looking for is an indication from yourself, Stephen, about the role of the various committees, ours in particular, Blaenau Gwent's Governance and Audit Committee, and then other committees, about how they feed in to this and how we build relationships across the councils. You've referred to the federation model, and you talk of shared alignments on performance frameworks, joint leadership, governance structures, and how senior leaders and are meeting and working together. But I just want to get a flavour of how perhaps ourselves can be part of that process as the whole exercise develops over the next few years. And then just a specific question about Blaenau Gwent. Are they looking at becoming a Marmot council? And then within this report and a number of other reports that come in front of us, you highlight senior management, staff, members. When you refer to members, for me that's elected members, but obviously there aren't few of us who are lay co-opted members, and I just wondered whether we should be highlighted specifically, or when you say members, you mean everyone who is on a committee. Thank you. Diolch.
So thank you for that. So just I can cover off the Blaenau and Gwent becoming a Marmot Council. It took us about, the work we've been doing around Marmot in Torvine started a couple of years, 2.5 years before we started our conversation with Blaenau and Gwent during that initial discovery phase. And it's, you know, as has been mentioned before, these things need to be considered and planned and worked through. And but we got there in Torvine. We were the first Marmot Council in Wales, for example. But Blaenau and Gwent achieved what we'd achieved in rapid pace because of all the work that we'd done in Torvine and all that we'd learned. It meant that actually we could help Blaenau and Gwent on the way, and they achieved in 9 months what it had taken us a couple of years to achieve. They are already a Marmot Council, therefore, so we're the first 2 Marmot Councils, and that's what makes all of this so much easier to manage. In terms of the joining of, it's a great question and quite topical at the moment, because Councillor Ashley mentioned we've recently brought in Steve Thomas, who's the former, who's now a consultant, independent consultant, but he's the former CEO of the WLGA. People may know of Steve. But he's working independently with members. It's important that that work is done independently. So I've commissioned him to do the work, but I don't get involved in this work myself because I really want him to be able to be hearing what members are saying without the interference of myself or officers for that matter. So and from that, what Steve has identified is a real eagerness, more broadly, for members. And we're talking here about, in this case, we're talking specifically about our county councillors across both boroughs. He's found a real appetite for us to work to bring members together, at least so that people can get to know one another and that they can be discussing the topics that are going on across the 2 councils and the opportunities too. So that's music to my ears. I think that's something that you would want to hear as a chief exec. I think that's really important. I know that in places in England where chief execs have tried to operate across 2 councils, that's not always possible or not always welcome. And certainly, again, I think if I'd have tried to suggest or impose that upon members, they rightly would have said, no, we're not going to do that. But because members are identifying it themselves, I think it shows culturally where our 2 sets of members are too in a very positive light. Now, what does that mean, I suppose, in terms of scrutiny, governance and audit and other committees? Well, because we are sovereign, we need to ensure that our councils make decisions that are independent of one another. That's important, and they'll consider their own actions, their own issues. Now, of course, because we're working much more closely together and because we're boroughs with similar challenges and because it makes sense for us, if we're going to take advantage of our closer working, that we'll do things at the same time, many of the same things. Blaenau and Gwent has a deal, Torvine has a deal, but they're not the same deal. They're a deal in each place to tackle the challenges within each of those communities. The sovereignty of those committees matters to us, but that's not to say that we can't, with that eagerness that we've got, including from scrutiny chairs in the past, we can't be thinking about ways that we might be able to bring those groups together to consider issues and benefit from one another's experience and views. We would still, of course, have to work out what that means for us in terms of sovereignty. We can't in any way jeopardise that. We must always ensure that we remain sovereign. We have signed a Section 113 agreement across the 2 councils, which gives us scope to start to explore. That gives us the room for us to employ people more effectively, in the right legal framework across both councils, and whether or not that affords us constitutional changes in the future, almost a shared piece of constitution across the 2. That's something that members would have to decide. It's not something for officers to decide. But I think there's a way to work around that where we could see some of those benefits play out. Just to answer the final question, yeah, it is fair to say, and I'm probably going to refer to Tom on this one, it is fair to say when we refer to members in this report, we are predominantly talking here about our county councillors, that they're our bosses, if you like. They're the ones that we obviously, they set our political direction and the ones that we work to. But I do think, though, investing in lay members and all people who are supporting the council is a really important thing to us. And I think, and generally speaking, what we would like to do is always keep an open mind, in my view, and I'll ask Tom to come in here perhaps, but my view is we'd like to keep a really open mind as to ensure that all people who are supporting the council get an appropriate level of support, even if it's a different time than, say, for example, when we bring together our county councillors who have a particular relationship and need and level of support that they require from us. So I'd like to make sure that we're investing in our members more broadly in that sense. But I think, in terms of, perhaps I'll ask Tom to discuss what we can do about that. Although we've already mentioned, for example, here about lay members getting involved, for example, within our work in January and February, as Tom has already mentioned earlier.
Yeah, just very briefly, as Stephen has already said, you know, when we talk about members, I suppose in many ways it depends on the context that we're talking about in this report. It is quite often about their role in the community as community leaders, and therefore we are thinking more about elected members if we're talking about them in regards to their work within the committee meeting setting. Then of course lay members are involved as well. I think as far as, you know, member development is concerned, I think it's a good challenge. I think that the action point was appropriate in the last meeting, and it's something that we need to make sure that we don't forget lay members when we're looking to provide training, member development opportunities, member seminars. If there is an opportunity to get lay members involved, if there's going to be clear benefits for those lay members of this committee, then yeah, I need to make sure that you're being invited and having the same opportunities as elected members, providing it's not a very good reason not to.
Thank you very much. I think that's quite reassuring. Thank you. Councillor Jones, your hand is raised.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I want to return to what Stephen was talking about. Was it proportionate universalism and how that impacts on deprived wards? I've struggled with this concept. Let's take the example that Councillor Kyle raised about if you've got a school with 4 times more additional learning needs pupils than another area. It feels to me like we should skew funding more towards supporting that school if we're going to raise standards. But we've only got one financial cake, and how that's cut, there are always going to be winners and losers. So I just wondered if, Stephen, you could explain in a bit more detail this concept of proportionate universalism and how that's going to raise standards generally.
Well, it's a well-established principle of Marmot, so it is absolutely aligning to those foundational ideas that exist within that model of working, and it's quite clear that the risk is if you invest in one community over another, you may make progress within that community, but you are effectively leaving a community behind. And if you don't invest to some degree across all communities, then people move backwards. It's as simple as that. And I think that's a challenge. I think that's a challenge for all local authorities to consider, who are not operating with Marmot or something that ensures that proportionate universalism is applied. So But yeah, the answer is there is only a certain amount of resources that we've got. We are, of course, growing resources. The deal is about working differently, a new relationship with our communities, and about us having more resources to tackle those challenges within those communities. There's no doubt about that. So we're a council that is doing two things. We're growing the resource from that perspective, and as I said earlier, we're working hard to ensure that we provide great services to people who are in receipt of our statutory services such as social care and housing support, etc. We want them to have an excellent level of service, but the only people we want to have that service are the people that genuinely do need it. And that's why the early intervention and prevention investment really does matter. So that's the way that we are growing our resource and our offer to our communities. But it is important that we ensure that we don't leave communities behind at the expense of others. And I think there's plenty of councils that will have suffered from that approach in the past. So so the answer is we will look at our communities through our Marmot lens, and we will distribute our resources accordingly to ensure that we achieve that proportionate universal approach. So that's exactly the approach we're taking, and it's working. I mean, we're starting to see that. We're a council that can see that proportionately we've got lower spend in adult social care now than we did have previously, in proportionately. But that's because we've been able to support people earlier in their journey before they need to get into care. And that means that what we can do is spread that resource much more broadly, and that's the approach that we're taking.
Thank you.
Mr. Kelleher, your hand's raised.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I spent about 30 to 40 years in commercial and industrial settings supporting processes like peer review and peer assessments. I just wanted to comment that this is the first one I've seen that's so constructively positive. They're normally used to beat others with a cudgel, in my experience. So I think, to some extent, I think it's a verification of your approach, Stephen, and I think I would like to just note my congratulations that it's an important milestone that others outside of Torvine and Blaenau Gwent see the future positive for both councils.
Yeah, thank you for the comments. I have to say, I thought the peer review the panel review were excellent. I mean, they were well led by Jack Straw, and they were very, very well engaged. They were really knowledgeable too about their stuff. They were really interested as well in what we were doing, and I do know that all of them took something back to their own councils, their own places of work from us. And they did see that we were an innovative council trying to do something different and trying to do something new. Because what we know as a council is that more of the same will result in more of the same, which is our communities becoming increasingly difficult, difficult experiences for them, increasingly unequal across our communities. So they, I think, were quite enthused by the approach we were taking. But I share your view. It's a very positive report, and it's very welcome. They worked with us really well in partnership, but they didn't shy away from challenging us in the areas that we needed to be challenged on. And that's fine, because whilst we are definitely good at many things, we can't pretend to be good at everything. And they pointed that out to us, and we've had to take that on the chin, and we will, where we think it's a priority for us, make those improvements, sometimes rapidly, and sometimes we'll do them over a longer time.
Councillor Ashley, back to you.
Very quick one, because I appreciate time's going and I may have to go at 11:45. I was involved with the community's first process, and I was going back to my colleague's remarks on proportionate universalism. We had a very good measure there, and I'm sure it's something that's used now. But I was looking at the areas in our borough, both all up and down it, that were marked down as community's first areas, deprivation, etc. And then the Lord Chancellor's Department came along and did another area which was totally unexpected. And so where did they get that from? And it was about the elderly. And it just depends on what measures you look about where deprivation or where problems lie. And that was an area that was considered affluent by other people. But if you've got a preponderance of older people, they're not necessarily in the areas where you would get a preponderance of. So it's a matter of how you look at the data as to whether an area's got a problem. And that would be a care problem as opposed to an area is deprivation area. So I think the Chief Executive is quite right about how you look at the problem. And I was going to get away from that and say I sat through the process as scrutiny chair, which I'm not anymore. I thought this was an extremely useful process, and again, we were very supportive of what Mr. Kepner was saying about the process. It was positive, and the scrutiny chairs, all of us, were very supportive about it, and we had a really good session with the panel, and I think came out what we wanted to see. As I said before, it's about mapping the territory, as it were, because at the end of the day, hopefully we'll get there and positive. And I think the partnership model is, as Steve Thomas said to us, and we all totally agree, is the only, at the moment in Wales, is one of the few options in town. And good luck to Stephen and our council and the other council for going there.
I quite agree. Thank you, Councillor Ashley. I think Peter Williams wants to come in with something.
Yeah, only a quick point. I think one of the issues that Mrs. Rees raised earlier is about the role of Audit Committee. I don't see a great deal of change in that, because in terms of the role of Audit Committee is seeking assurance that our governance processes are in place. That will still occur whatever we share with Brian Gwent. As Stephen has said, we're still sovereign. We've got our own governance statement, we've got our own statement of accounts, our own decision-making processes. Over a period of time, some of those might become harmonised as we work closer together in our processes. If they do, well, it will change some of our governance arrangements, but I don't see those being a delineation of where we are at the moment. In fact, if we look at each other's things and take the positives from both, it improves the governance processes. So I don't think there's any concerns from that point of view, and I think we will still maintain our sovereignty, and the role of Audit Committee is to seek the assurance that the governance processes, whatever arrangements are in place, are still good enough. Do they say on the tin effectively? And as you know from previous reports you've had for the years, and the next one on the agenda is about the governance statements. We have good governance processes, we have good standards, and I don't see those decreasing anytime soon, to be honest.
That's lovely, that's quite reassuring. Thank you very much. And thank you, Stephen, for presenting this report. It is good, it is very positive. I always thought Torfaen is a very positive council. I've always been quite pleased to be associated with it. So moving on now, we have no more questions or queries. Members, the recommendations are on page 24 of the agenda. Please can you state if you're against the recommendations or wish to abstain? Otherwise we'll take this lovely report as read. I can see nobody objecting, so we'll take it as agreed. Thank you. And thank you for answering all the questions. It was very interesting, and thank you for keeping us up to date with it. Thank you. Goodbye. Oh, I'll do the same. Thank you. Right, moving on to agenda item 7, the annual governance statement. Dennis, you've joined us today. Monitoring Officer, please can you present your report for us?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the purpose of this is to present to you the annual governance statement for the year 2024-2025 for your comments before it is submitted to Council for it to be approved. The statement sets out the governance arrangements and processes that have been operating within the authority for the last year, and the officers responsible for the various governance processes have contributed to the contents of this statement. I don't propose to go through the entire document. It's largely the same as last year, but I will highlight some of the key updates for you. Paragraphs 5.4 to 5.9 sets out what has been done in the last year to ensure that there is engagement from citizens and key stakeholders. So, for example, a participation strategy for children and young people was approved this year, and that outlines how public engagement with all ages has taken place. Paragraph 5.7 refers to the invitation to register for the People's Panel in February this year, and in September a participatory group for officers within the Council was established. If you look at paragraph 6.6, you'll note that the Council adopted its third delivery plan, and that sets out how the Council meets the ambition set out in the county plan. Paragraphs 8.1 to 8.3 refer to the federated model of political governments with the new arrangements between Torfaen and Blaenau Gwent, and you've heard from the Chief Executive how those arrangements will work. Paragraph 10.9 refers to an improvement group looking at the children's services, scrutinising costs and service activity to take greater control over demand and accelerate financial recovery, and that is similar to the arrangements already in place for education. And paragraph 11, which is important, that's the review of the effectiveness. The internal audit team continues to review the control environment of the council, and the overall opinion has improved from last year, from reliable to sound with scope for improvement. And there are no significant control issues that need to be reported, and the review of effectiveness has concluded that the arrangements are effective. So that's the annual statement. So it's here for you to comment, as I said before, it's submitted to Council for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Daleth. Anybody got any questions or queries with regards to this report? Mr. Rees, I see your hand is raised.
Diolch, Chair, and diolch yn fawr, Delith, for your report. Just a few little minor queries, if you don't mind. Paragraph 7.4, which begins, the Governance and Audit Committee considers the effectiveness of the Council's governance arrangements, etc., etc. There's a sentence there, a separate document is not produced to evidence this. Should that be a separate document is produced, or have I misread that?
No, in fact, I think this was historically put in, so it's a while ago since the sentence was there. No, I think it is correct as it is, really. We don't have a separate document for that.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to be nitpicky. And then paragraph 9.6, it mentions SIAS, and I may be jumping ahead here, but obviously on the agenda we're talking about GIAS. Apologies for the acronyms. Should there be any reference in here to GIAS? Perhaps Peter might be able to answer that. Or is this a retrospective document that, you know, is covering when GIAS wasn't actually in place? Thank you.
Well, this is for the period up to the end of March 2025. So I suppose I'll refer to Peter really with regard to the timing.
Yeah, I think you answered your own question there, to be honest. The AGS refers to the period to the 31st of March 2025, and GIAS came in from May 2025. So in next year's AGS, the references would be all about GIS, not PSIAS. Apologies for the acronyms.
No, thank you, Peter. I just want to make sure it's all done properly and above board. Thank you.
Thank you very much all for that. Has anybody else got any questions or queries, comments with regard to this report? No, I see no other hands raised. So members, the recommendations are on page 58 of the agenda. Please can you state if you're against the recommendations or wish to abstain? Otherwise we'll take them as agreed. Okay, I think everybody's agreed. Thank you. Thank you, Delyth, for your report. Moving on to agenda item 8, the Mid-Term Treasury Management Monitoring Report. Rob Green, Head of Financial Services, please could you present this report for us?
Thank you, Chair. So this is a regular report that you would receive every sort of mid-year point of a financial year. It's a requirement of us within the Treasury Management Code of Practice set out by CITFA in terms of bringing this report firstly to Governance and Audit Committee and then ultimately to Council, as the ultimate responsibility for sort of setting the Treasury strategy sits with Council. It covers the first 6 months of the year, and critically it focuses on our compliance with our prudential indicators that we've set for the year and confirms to date that we have indeed complied with them and we anticipate complying with them for the remainder of the year. There's various tables within the report that just set out some of our sort of capital and treasury activity. So table 1 gives you an overview of the capital programme in terms of where it is compared to the estimates set for the year. And as is often the case, you can see that our programme has grown during the course of the year. That's perfectly typical because of the way that grants get allocated during the year, and we apply for grants during the year. So at the start of the year, you don't necessarily know which grants you'll be successful in obtaining, and they get allocated. So our capital programme is now bigger than we anticipated that it would have been. The report gives a flavour of some of the schemes within the capital programme. I won't go into those in any great detail. Just moving through the report, table 2 just gives the financing overview of the capital programme and just highlights that the majority of funding we get is actually external funding. It's capital grant money that we tend to get from Welsh Government, and our actual borrowing need for the year is still relatively small. That's basically the capital expenditure that we don't have any other sources for, and so by default borrowing becomes the funding source, but it is relatively low, and critically it's affordable within our revenue budget. Table 3 gives an overview of the capital financing requirements. That's our theoretical need to borrow. Again, as you can see, it's increased. That's largely due to an accounting requirement change to do with the way we account for leases, but ultimately it's broadly looking like it's going to be stable over the medium term, which by default means it should be fairly affordable and manageable. The really critical thing that we must ensure compliance with is set out in Table 4 and 5, our authorised limit and our operational limit around borrowing. And again, you can see that the limit versus our forecast is in our favour, so we're not forecasting a breach of either of those limits. And again, that's the critical measure in terms of are we managing our finances appropriately. And I think beyond that, I could go into all the tables in detail. We've got tables that show the debt activity in terms of borrowing and investments, but ultimately, as I said, it's all in line with the indicators we set for the year. And just 4.7, probably to conclude on, just highlights that actually in terms of our investment return, we're doing quite well. And given that, as a local authority, we generally are low risk appetite. We tend to be prudent, but actually we're comparing favourably with some of these sort of industry benchmarks. So it shows that the money that we do have to invest, we're putting to reasonably good work. And yeah, that's probably it. Like I say, happy to take any questions on that report.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions with regards to this report, please? Councillor Ashley, your hand is raised.
Yeah. It's fairly minor stuff by your terms, Rob. It's I noticed in one place it said about we got some allocation from the National Lottery. I'm probably aware of that because is that via local voluntary organisations or is that stuff we apply for in our own right?
Yeah, I can't actually find the reference at the moment, but
it's only one reference in there, and I was surprised to see it there. I just wondered whether we acted as an agent for various community organisations, or whether we did that in our own right. I know things like parks and that get bits of equipment via them, don't they? It'd probably be something like that, wouldn't it?
Yeah, where it's in our programme, it will generally be us obtaining that funding in our own name. Without knowing the specific reference, I wouldn't be able to comment. But yeah, generally speaking, we as an authority would also access heritage lottery funding and things like that for sort of heritage cultural type schemes. So yeah, it would have been in our own name.
Where would you? I mean, I'm on the canal. Sorry to the people that hear me on canals, but obviously our canal programme would be looking at that as well. in our own name. I just wonder where would it sit? As a matter of interest more than anything else, because I presume under neighbourhood and environment or something like that, would it?
Yeah, it would depend. It would depend on the scheme. I'd say that in most cases it's either going to be neighbourhoods and environment or economy in place. Some of the sort of regen cultural activity that we would do might attract some lottery funding, so it would be most likely one of those two services.
And because we've got quite a bit of stuff like this, there's the data recovery and that big 800,000 thing that you've got as well. There's quite a few funds like that floating around the council at the moment, isn't there?
Well, yeah.
The tree fund, I'm thinking of.
Yeah, so as I said earlier, the majority of our funding tends to be external grants, and within that, a range of different funding bodies. So yeah, you will see quite a variety of grants across the capital programme, including the lottery funding.
Right, thank you very much for that.
Okay, thank you. Has anybody else got any other questions or queries with regards to this report? No. Okay, members, the recommendations are on page 86 of the agenda. Please can you state if you're against the recommendations or wish to abstain, otherwise we'll take them all as agreed. Right, we'll take them as agreed. Thank you. Thank you, Rob. Moving on to agenda item 9, Capital and Treasury Management Strategy 26-27 to 30-31. Back to you, Mr. Green. Head of Financial Services, can you present this report to us? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, me again. So this is now a forward-looking report in the same sort of subject matter in terms of capital and treasury. So this is looking at our longer-term plans for 26-27 onwards. And just to remind the committee that this ultimately will go to full council for approval, and those very limits we were just talking about our compliance with in 25-26 will then be set for the forthcoming year, based on the information we put forward to council. Again, this is a requirement from SIPA in terms of their prudential code and capital financing requirements to set out a long-term strategy around capital and treasury management. I think it's important to highlight that this coming to this committee now is to do with our strategy, and we're seeking comment and maybe endorsement in terms of strategy as opposed to the specifics around the programme itself. Ultimately, the programme is determined by a combination of Cabinet and Council in terms of the schemes that find their way into the programme. Obviously, this is setting the parameters within which we work, particularly in terms of borrowing. And it's important to highlight that some of these specific figures within this report will naturally move and change between now and March when that's considered by Council. That's perfectly normal, that's perfectly typical, because things will happen, things will change, things will slip. But the strategy that wraps around it, in my opinion, shouldn't change. Barring anything major that emerges, it should be the same strategy. It's just that some of the figures will change. I don't propose to talk through the report in a huge amount of detail, simply because there's quite a lot to take in. There's also a detailed appendix on our Treasury strategy specifically. But I suppose just to highlight a couple of perhaps pertinent points in terms of our approach on borrowing and investments, and that ultimately dictates the sort of approach in practical terms in terms of borrowing and investments. In terms of borrowing, generally, we would seek to use our own resources for borrowing requirement before we seek external. So that sort of aligns with an internal borrowing strategy, which a lot of councils have, and we have as well. So basically, our capital plans and expenditure dictates a theoretical need to borrow, but actually if we've got cash available of our own, we would use that, and we would forego the interest we would otherwise earn on that fund, rather than seeking external loans, generally because the cost of an external loan is more than the interest lost on an investment. So we would continue to propose using that internal borrowing approach, but obviously, as it says in the report, retaining a minimum level of investments, just to ensure we always do have enough cash available, and that we're not constantly running things too tightly. So that's the kind of principle in terms of borrowing, and just allied to that, just to highlight that as interest rates are still comparatively high, especially if you look at what they were a few years back, and the general sense is that they should reduce over the sort of short to medium term, we're generally taking an approach to look at short-term temporary borrowing. The rates for that tends to be more favourable, and why would we tie ourselves into long-term loans at higher rates than they might be in a year's time? We're better to kind of use temporary borrowing to plug that gap and then look to access longer-term borrowing as and when we feel that rates have fallen and hopefully fallen to a kind of their lowest point. You're never going to know for certain. The only thing we know with Treasury is you'll always have an element of regret after you've made a decision. But we're trying to do this in the most sort of planned, sensible way possible. So that's our kind of approach on borrowing. In terms of investments, the priority for us is always safeguarding the amount that we're investing. So the way we approach investments is to prioritise those in terms of order of security, liquidity and yield. So the return is the kind of latter consideration. First and foremost, we have to make sure we are going to get that money ultimately back. Generally that we can get it back fairly quickly in case we were to need it, and then the yield is the consideration. So we're not chasing the highest interest rates and putting all other considerations to one side and making sure that that money is safeguarded first and foremost. So generally, as a result, we have a fairly low-risk approach. Again, most local authorities do, and clearly we don't want to end up in the position that some counterparts across the border have in terms of some more risky Treasury management approaches that have landed them in fairly difficult situations and hot water. So that's our approach in terms of investments. We'll generally look to keep a minimum investment balance of around 15 million. We need 10 million as a minimum to comply with something called the MiFID II regulations, which means that we get access to favourable PWLB loans, which is generally our source of longer-term borrowing. So we'll always ensure we've got at least 10 million, but aim for 15 for cash flow purposes. That's probably the main thing to highlight. Perhaps the final point, just on paragraph 5.15, just kind of gives an overview of how those decisions get made, and ultimately it's the Section 151 officer, in our case the Strategic Director of Resources, who has the delegation for making decisions day-to-day in terms of borrowing and investing, because obviously sometimes we have to make them at fairly short notice, particularly if opportunities present themselves with rates dropping day-to-day and things like that. We also engage, as all local authorities do, external Treasury advisors, because this is a complex area. So we take their advice. They'll never make decisions on our behalf, but they will advise us around different products we might look to engage with on either the borrowing or investment side, and just ensure that we are complying with all those sort of external regulations that we have to adhere to. I think that's probably enough on that, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that in-depth report. I've got more of a query than a question. With the risks on 6.1, there are quite a few risks. Obviously, they're all things that you can't control. Should we be worried?
I'm never going to say no, don't worry at all, because that will clearly come back and bite me. But yeah, generally, that they're risks that we're managing year to year, day by day. Ultimately, things like the Welsh Government funding, we state that as a risk. We've actually had our indication for 26-27 now, since sort of this report was. Oh no, actually it's reflected in the report. So we've got fair confidence around that. But the individual grants, you never know for certain. But generally, if they've already committed to giving us funding for a specific project, that's generally secure. It's not commonplace that would be sort of whipped away from under us. Project overspend is just another example. We do monitor that closely. We've got a capital accountant who's monitoring this on a monthly basis. So we'll get early indications of potential overspends coming forward, and we'll take action as necessary. So they are all risks. They can all happen, but generally we feel that we manage them as well as we can and appropriately.
Thank you for the reassurance. Has anybody else got any questions or queries with regards to this report, please? No. I see no hands raised. Thank you. I think it was a really good explanation of the report. So moving on then, if members are happy, recommendations are on page 86. Please can you state if you're against recommendations or wish to abstain, otherwise we'll take them as agreed. Okay, all agreed, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 9, Capital and Treasury Management Strategy. Oh, no, that's right. Do again. That's what we just done. I thought that, sorry. Right. Agenda item 10. Update on external regulatory reports. It's your turn this time, Tom Roberts. Business and Director Support Manager. Please can you present the report for us?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members again. So this is your usual report setting out details of new external audit work received by the Council. As the committee is aware, Torfaen Council has a protocol for dealing with the new external audit reports, which has been agreed by this committee. In brief, that requires all new reports to be received by the Governance and Audit Committee, referred to the relevant scrutiny committee, or maintained under the oversight of this committee and monitored every 6 months. The report isn't for the committee to undertake detailed scrutiny of the recommendations, rather it is to assure itself that the recommendations being received are being properly considered and actioned. That said, if there are any questions about the specifics of each report, I will either try and answer or get you the information you need outside of this meeting. As you can see, there are 2 new reports received by the Council since the last update in September 2025. A regional CIW report on the South East Wales Adoption Service and a local Audit Wales report on the Council's leisure strategy. So as far as the South East Wales Adoption Service, the focus of this work was on how South East Wales Adoption Service promotes the well-being and safety of children through the provision of permanency with adoptive families who can safely meet their needs and improve the likelihood of them achieving the best possible outcomes. The South East Wales Adoption Service is a regional service hosted by Blaenau Gwent. It is overseen by a regional management board, with the report finding it provides strong governance and strategic direction. Adoption assessments are robust and practitioners demonstrate excellent safeguarding awareness. However, there are challenges. Adoption support services face delays due to waiting lists, recruitment of adopters is insufficient to meet children's needs, and the current premises are not ideal for service delivery. A number of key priorities and recommendations were identified as part of the work, and these include reviewing the Statement of Purpose annually, promoting the Welsh Language Active Offer, developing a strong marketing strategy to recruit adopters, and ensuring timely, equitable support across all local authority areas. A regional response to these priorities for action and recommendations is being developed, and this will be referred to and monitored by the Children and Families Scrutiny Committee. The Leisure Strategy Report. The Council's leisure strategy was developed in accordance with the Sustainable Development Principle, informed by data and aligned with corporate priorities. The Council has taken a collaborative approach to both developing and delivering the strategy. However, the consultation did not fully capture diverse views, and performance information is not yet sufficient to track progress effectively. Audit Wales has made 2 recommendations to this end. First, to strengthen engagement and consultation to ensure the views of communities are all represented, and second, to establish baseline data and set clear targets and milestones to measure progress against the strategy. An organisational response to these recommendations has been developed and agreed with Audit Wales, and that is included in Appendix 3, and this will be referred for future monitoring by the Adults and Communities Scrutiny Committee. Finally, I'd like to remind members that officers with responsibility for addressing recommendations receive reports and are required to ensure the Council responds appropriately. These reports have already been received and discussed by the Council's leadership team. The process will continue to be monitored through reports received by this committee, the Council Scrutiny Committees, as well as executive and leadership teams. I'll be happy to try and take any questions.
Has anyone got any questions with regards to these 2 reports? Mr. Rees, your hand is raised.
Diolch, Chair, and diolch, Tom, for presenting those reports. And I appreciate, Tom, that you may not be able to answer this question, but and thanks to Audit Wales for their work on this as well. The report about leisure services and the one recommendation there about an issue with performance measures. I mean, it's good that that's been highlighted and now will be dealt with. But I just wondered if there was an explanation as to why, when this strategy was put in place, that that issue of a baseline of performance measures for which you can then compare future progress, why that wasn't thought of in the first place, if you get where I'm coming from. Thanks.
In many ways, I think it's a victim of timing. We've got a new strategy, as has been discussed earlier. We're looking at new ways of monitoring progress. We've got a new leisure provider within the area. It's all about developing the performance measures that we need to make sure that we're monitoring progress appropriately going forward. So a lot of the measures we're looking to put in place now are new measures for the organisation. So we haven't necessarily got that baseline that we'd like to have in place yet in place, but that will come. As you can see within the action plan, there's clear actions for making sure that there's a robust approach in place for monitoring our performance going forward. So, like I said, in brief, I think it's just a victim of timing and the council wanting to go in a slightly different direction.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor Ashley, your hand is raised.
Yeah, I guess, funny enough, it's just an observation rather than anything else. We've just had a call on the Finance and Environment Committee for contracts for sports grounds and parks, which is another one which falls within this leisure management strategy, because obviously why we do that is the same thing. So, and I'm just wondering, people need to talk to each other a bit, don't they, on this one? I think it's interesting that they are. It's not just the other scrutiny committee is doing it. That's why we're on this committee. Some of us. It struck me that's a wider community objective. Going back to what the chief executive was talking about, it's good that I was on the ball with that, to be honest, because there's quite a considerable cost. Maybe not in terms of finance, but in terms of time doing these contracts. I'll leave it there, shall I?
Just to say that into the review, was to assess our compliance with the sort of sustainability principle, the Future Generations Act, to make sure we're doing things in accordance with that. And integration, that as you know, Councillor Ashley, that's one of the sort of 5 pillars of the Future Generation Act, and it's not just integration within our, within partners and communities and other organisations. Integration is as important as far as making sure that one directorate is talking to another directorate and making sure that we're not all rowing in different directions. So just to provide assurance really that the council is trying to be as integrated as possible, and to make sure that we are all going in the same direction.
I would hope you had a handle on that, Tom, because you're pretty good at that normally.
I'm sure he has.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Keith, you've got a question.
In your key findings, South Wales Adoption Services, it's mentioned there that there's a recruitment of adopters is a significant risk, yes? I'm just wondering, right, how we are mitigating these risks within this area. Oh.
That is one question. It's a question too far for me. I mean, they aren't my findings. They are the findings of CIW. As I said, I've tried to get hold of the response to the report, but I haven't got it yet. It hasn't quite been agreed. I will, as soon as I've got that, I will distribute it amongst the committee. And if there's any more information then that the committee needs, I will source that. But other than the recommendation, sorry, that's all I have. I haven't got a response.
Thank you. I've got a comment more than a query. Do you know where they are based? Because the last item, the last words on the report actually is 211. The current premises occupied at CBUS are not fully suitable for the service needs. They're based somewhere in Blaenau Gwent, but I couldn't find anywhere in the report where it had an address.
again, other than I know it, like you said, it's been hosted in Blaen y Gwent, I'd have to get that information outside of the committee.
I just think it's a shame that such an important service is an accommodation that's not suitable. It's obviously been picked up by the review.
I think we'd know, well, we'd have a better idea about what's being done if we could get hold of the action plan. I will get that for members of the committee.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions or queries? If not, then can we move on to the recommendations which are on page 119? Please clearly state if you are against recommendations or wish to abstain. Otherwise, we'll take them as agreed. Yeah, I think everybody's happy. We'll accept these reports. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 11, the National Fraud Initiative, Audit Wales. Please could you present your report for us? I'm sorry you've been waiting for so long patiently. Please join us now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Board Pawb. This briefing note is to provide the committee an update on the National Fraud Initiative. The National Fraud Initiative is a UK-wide counter-fraud exercise conducted every 2 years. It helps prevent, detect and prevent fraud by electronically sharing data between public sector organisations. The briefing note provides a national level update as well as some local data for Torfaen. We're asking for the committee just to note the contents of the report. Over the coming months, coming up to autumn 2026, a national report will be published by Audit Wales and shared with the committee. But aside from that, I'm happy to take any questions on the briefing note. Also, just to note that I think Peter has added some additional data to the briefing note, which provides sort of more current data of the council's progress on reviewing the data matches.
Okay, thank you for that. So over to Peter if you want to add what you want to.
Yeah, just a quick one. Pages 173 to 174 just give a summary of the sort of complexity and the types of matches that this exercise throws out on a 2-year basis. It obviously shows the progress we're making in terms of the ones we've opened, the ones we've dealt with. I think a key thing is at the bottom, the figures are not significant in terms of errors we picked up. It's about £5,000. They're not fraudulent, they're errors. It's a timing issue with some things. Big ones in there, which look as if there isn't any progress, but there is. I think they refer to on page 174. There's reports around duplicate payments and duplicate creditors, 707, 708. We do an annual exercise with the creditors team anyway in terms of picking up duplicate payments annually. So that exercise only just started, so that's why it indicates not a lot of progress on that, but we will update that when we get to the end of it. A big thing on that one is, while the figures look significant, 12,000, potentially 12,800 duplicate records, in terms of context, we make a lot of payments to social care homes for the same weekly amount to the same number of people 52 times a year. Therefore, they're not errors, they're not frauds, those payments are genuinely the same amounts, and they occur 52 times a year for the number of clients you make the payments for. So, but the way the programme runs, you can't dictate whether it's a fraud or an error, but it's a natural payment, and it's a correct transaction that does occur. So I'm not expecting too much to come out of it, but that's where we are at the moment. And Audit do some of the checks, and departments do a significant amount of the checks as well. So we just keep chipping them along the way sometimes, because it is a resource-intensive process, and other things have to happen as well as this. But I think it's good progress being made on today. But that's the up-to-date position on that appendix.
Thank you. Has anybody got any questions or queries with regards to this report, please? Mr. Rees, your hand is raised.
Diolch, Chair, and diolch, Peter and James, for your comments on the report. I'm just looking for something from yourselves to sort of indicate to us the whole point of gathering this information together, and having gathered all that information and compared comparing it, and then it highlights, certain issues, discrepancies, if you like. Where do we go from there? How do we use this information? I think is in a nutshell what I'm looking for. And then in the data further down in the report, where you've got different exhibits, and you've got all data matches, very high risk, medium risk, very high risk and high risk. I just wondered if someone could comment on exactly what does that mean, and the impact that might have on the council. Thank you.
James,
I'm happy to.
James,
I'm happy to answer the
one?
questions.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the purpose of collecting all this data together, if you are meaning by the exercise in general, not just the briefing note, the purpose is to prevent and detect fraud. Either that's just done by an individual trying to undertake fraud, or if someone's just simply not told the council or updated them with more recent, so more of an error. That's the main purpose of this exercise. I guess across Wales, we're reporting savings currently of around £5 million. So it's definitely an exercise worth doing. And then the difference between very high risk and high risk is really a prioritization sort of categorization. So the Cabinet Office determines the level of risk for each match. They have sort of an underlying scoring sort of matrix, I guess. Page 169 sort of sets out how that's determined. So it's based on sort of the risk logic, which is a set of criteria for each data set, which indicates the likelihood of fraud. And then there's another sort of thing that feeds into that, which is sort of gives sort of a certainty of whether that person still resides at that address. So it's a combination of the two. The Cabinet Office, which is sort of the organisation that oversees NFI in general, suggests that all very high risk matches to be looked at, and sort of that's what I believe Torvine. Peter will come in and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the approach that Torvine undertake, is that they'll look at all very high risk matches, with the exception, I think, of creditors, which is undertaken outside of NFI. I hope that answers your questions.
Okay, thank you for that, James. Are you happy with that?
Thank you, James. I'm sure you gathered where I was coming from, that, this is a very big exercise. This takes time, a lot of effort, a lot of staff time. And I just wanted to make sure that when things are highlighted, there's then consequences, and something is done about them. It's just not that these are just collected for the sake of collecting them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Are there any other questions or queries? No.
Just a quick one.
Councillor Keith.
Do you feel as though that Torvine, do we have enough capacity and resources to investigate the high-risk NFIs?
Yeah, we use the grading as a sort of prioritisation step, so we do look at the very high and depending on resources, we look further down. Usually, sometimes it's a pattern of things. If it's a breakdown in control, we'll work that one out. So, we do use the grading, but we certainly do look at the very high and the high risk. And as I've said in previous reports to the Audit Committee, we don't get significant amounts out of it, and I think that's probably an indication of perhaps the control systems are quite good. Mm-hmm. But, never say never, really. You know what I mean? But, it is what it is. It identifies things, and they could be frauds, they could be errors, and we investigate them. And individually, you've got to investigate them. It could result in a sort of disciplinary or some sort of prosecution. It really does depend on the nature of the individual match.
Cheers, thanks.
Councillor Ashley, your hand's raised.
It's not about this, Chair. I'm going to have to get off this call at 1:45.
Okay, fine. I think.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to Peter. I do look forward to his bits, but I unfortunately got to go to the doctor's appointment.
Okay, were there any questions with regard to the next agenda item you wanted to pose before you go?
No, I'll be all right. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Thank you for letting us know.
Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no other questions or queries with regard to this report, can you accept it, please? And thank you, Audit Wales, for presenting it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to agenda item 12, the internal audit progress against operational plan 25-26. Peter Williams, please can you present the report for us?
Thank you, Chair. This is the routine quarterly report in terms of update. Key messages on page 175. Making good progress against the plan. We've achieved 57% against the target of 85. I think we'll get the 85. On average, it should be around the 50 to 55% at this time of the year. The core plan, which are the main systems, we've achieved 83% there. I think there's only 2 jobs outstanding, so assuming no decrease in resources that I'm aware of, we should hit those targets. There's no significant issues I need to bring to the attention of the committee this time. As outlined in paragraph 4.2, we've had no further high priority recommendations identified. One of the audits we undertook was about community halls, and I identified a number of expected controls are not in place, and the opinion was limited. But we will do a follow-up in due course to make sure the agreed actions are implemented. Paragraph 4.3 gives a table of follow-up audits, which I think I promised I'd bring to this one, which shows the progress where we do the follow-up and subsequently recommendations have been implemented. You can see the system opinions improving there, like moderate to substantial, what remain substantial, etc. But it's all moving forward, so I think the key message is no significant issues to bring to your attention at this quarter in terms of the work we've undertaken.
Thank you very much. Has anybody got any questions or queries or clarifications needed with regard to this report, please? No. All right. Okay, no, I see no hands raised, no questions or queries. Thank you, Peter, for that. Moving on to other recommendations on page 118. So if nobody has got any questions or queries, we'll accept them as agreed. Moving on to agenda item 13, Global Internal Audit Standards. Over to you again, Peter Williams.
Right, this is insomnia killer, this one. I've done a few presentations on this in recent months, as you know. There are now new global internal audit standards, apologies for the acronyms, GIAS, which are worldwide, as opposed to public sector ones, which were public sector UK-based ones in the past. Therefore, that throws up a few difficulties now, because they're going across sectors, so the complexity is slightly different. But I think at the last one, I said I'd been on a sort of course on it, and somebody described them as, it's a jigsaw. Somebody's now thrown the jigsaw on the floor, and you just go throw all the pieces back together. And having been through the assessment, I'm nearly at the end of it, I think that's a pretty good description. I haven't found any showstoppers in terms of things we're not complying with it, but I'm nearly at the end of it. But the purpose of this report is, one of the sort of requirements of the new Act, of the new standards, is to bring certain things to the attention of Audit Committee and Management Team. And I think that's mainly because of probably private sector issues rather than public sector issues. I have no complaints in Torvine about access to people, access to documents, access to anything. But I don't think other people enjoy that state, particularly in the private sector, where internal audit may not be invested in or be taken seriously. I got no issues on that one within Torvine, and I don't think many people probably have within the public sector. So I think that's just a bit of an impact of having global, worldwide standards across sectors rather than specific public sector ones. They are sort of dressed up in paragraph 3.7 about there are essential conditions that the head of internal audit must bring to people's attentions. So the Governance and Audit Board and the JET. The JET is Torvine's joint executive team, Stephen and his joint directors. Discuss the audit charter and the audit mandate. In terms of the audit charter, we've had an audit charter for years since the previous one had come in. There's not a lot of change in that, and it's attached as an appendix. In terms of our mandate, in terms of our authority to do the work, that's all set in statute in the public sector. We exist because the Accounts and Audit Regulations 2014 say a relevant body must have an adequate and effective system of internal audit and control, and that's discharged through employing people like me and my team to deliver that. Therefore, you know, I'm asking you to approve a mandate, which, to be honest, you don't know. You couldn't come up with an alternative, I think, to be honest. It is what it is. Obviously, that's re-emphasised then in terms of our own contract standing orders and constitution, and the Constitution has also got a section on the Audit Committee and the role of the Audit Committee, which we discharge through the working programme. So the purpose of the report is to bring to your attention those things, the Charter and the mandate, and look for sort of ratification. It's been to the JET, like I said last week, and they've approved it. The other thing I need to bring to your attention, if there's anything that sort of impairs my ability to do the job, or sort of lack of independence, there are none in Torvine that I need to bring to your attention. I have unfettered access to everything I need to audit, so that's not an issue. The final bit is there's one of the standards refers to producing an internal audit strategy. I am with a document that says internal audit strategy, but all the components of the strategy are in other documents that I've got, which are listed in paragraph 6.3. So there's the audit chart of the fraud strategy, the service plans, the fraud risk assessment, and that's supplemented by a table in the back which shows the constituent bits of a strategy are already in place within a raft of other documents within Torvine. I am brought on the one because I think the appendix does it for me. Therefore, I won't be doing an additional document in terms of a strategy. In terms of the standards, they don't change in terms of what we are before. There are three that you assess yourself every year, and you have an external assessment every 5th year. The categories still stay the same. You can either generally conform, partially conform, or do not conform. We've always been in the generally conform in the 2 external assessments we've had in 2017 and 2022. Next one's due in 2027, 2028. The results of my self-assessment, which I said are nearly complete, indicate we are still in the generally conform category, but I haven't quite got to the end of it. So the conclusion is the Charter and the mandate are attached for any comments or discussions, and hopefully you'll approve that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Have you got any questions or queries or discussion with regard to this mandate?
Just one on the GAS, right? Another abbreviation I've learned today. That was implemented April 2025? Yep. Oh.
Came into effect.
Right. So are there any areas at the moment with GAS, right, that as Torvine, as a council, that we're not fully aligned with at the moment, or are we all on board?
On board.
Thank you. Anybody else got any questions, queries? Mr. Rees, your hand's raised.
Diolch, Chair, and diolch yn fawr, Peter, for getting there with GS. Much appreciated. And I'm just throwing this out to everybody. I'm familiar with GS from work that I've done with a governance and audit committee on another council. But other members may not be completely familiar with it, you know, the background and that sort of thing. I don't know whether it's worth us getting together for some kind of briefing on it, or whether some information could be given out to us all so that we could read about it at our leisure. But it's just a thought. It's up to everybody else. Thanks.
Just a quick one. I'm struggling to sleep as it is. This is not going to help me. All right, sorry.
Yeah, I think when I brought the last update, I think I did commit to doing a sort of briefing or send documentation, and apologies, I haven't got around to that yet. But I can certainly, you know, look to do something in the new year on that.
Okay, thank you. Don't rush before Christmas, will you? Mr. Kelleher, your hand's raised.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was just about to endorse Mr. Rees's thoughts. I would think I would benefit from some more clarification on GS. Help us work forward.
Okay, thank you. I think Peter's got that in hand. Yeah. Thank you. Anything else? No. Right, regarding this then, recommendation is on page 188, and the internal audit charter and mandate are discussed and approved. So are we all happy to approve it? Yeah. Thank you. Take it as approved. Moving on, agenda item 14 is the Audit Committee Work Programme. It's been included for information only. Do you wish to comment on it, Peter?
No, it is what it is. I think we got through most of the business we planned to get through, and we'll get the March when we'll finalise that off.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to question or agree with that? It is what it is. We're working through it. Moving on then to agenda item 15, which is the date of the next meeting, which is the 19th of March 2026. Thank you all for coming and your contributions. I'll now close the meeting and wish you all a very happy Christmas and a lovely New Year. See you next year. Thank you. Thank you.
Nadolig llawen pawb.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas.